If you're wanting to start a podcast and you're not sure how to set it up for success from day one, you're in the right place. So today we're diving into another podcast foundation that is setting up your podcast format and your structure, which is essential before we hit record. Before we dive in, don't forget to grab my free Launch Your Podcast Roadmap. It's packed with tools, resources, everything you need to know from setting your foundations all the way down to launch day. So you're going to want to grab that resource. Okay, so there's several ways that we can structure our podcast. The most common ways are going to be a solo podcast where it's just you, the host, or the other way is a combination of a solo and a guest. So what are pros and cons of both? Pros of being a solo host. That positions you as the authority figure. That's going to put you front and center as the expert in the topics you're talking about. However, sometimes you want to have guests on, which is great because when we have a guest on, we can leverage their network as well, which will hopefully bring in new listeners, which will get them onto your email list. They'll funnel down into your paid offerings, which is the goal. So when it comes to having a solo and a guest episode, I like to see my clients have at least 2/3 be a solo episode versus a third being a guest episode. And why do I not like to see them all be guest episodes? This is why. So when you have a guest on every episode, what happens is it slowly starts to make your listeners think of your guest as an expert and you as an interviewer. So instead of them viewing you as the expert, they're starting to view you as the interviewer and they're looking at your guest as the expert. We want to keep you in that expert position with an occasional guest expert. So that's why I like to tell my clients 2/3 are solo episodes, 1/3 are guest episodes, so that we're always positioning you as the expert on your podcast and in that particular niche. Here's a question I get often from clients that are launching. How long should my episodes be? And how often should I launch them? So let's start with how long should episodes be. Buzzsprout did a survey and they found that the most common length of show that people enjoy are 20 to 40 minutes. So I personally like 20 to 40 minutes because I go for a walk. My walks are about half an hour. So for the most part, I can get an entire episode done in my walk. So I like shorter episodes because they just align with my lifestyle. So think about when you listen to a podcast episode, because I'm kind of bad about it. Like if it's longer than my walk, I'll probably forget to go back or I'll just start a new episode. So that's why I personally just like 20 to 40 minutes is a great time for me. And for my others too, because that's what Buzzsprout's survey showed. So that's what we kind of aim for with my clients, 20 to 40 minutes. I have one client that does like 15 to 25 minute episodes and they do great for her. I have one that her episodes are up to an hour long, and for her niche and for her audience, that works. But for the most part, 20 to 40 minutes is going to be your sweet spot. Now we come up with how often should you release an episode. So really, how often you release an episode should be dependent on how much time you have. How much time can you dedicate to putting out quality episodes? Because it's quality over quantity is what we want. We don't want to sacrifice quality for quantity. So the amount of episodes you're going to put out per month is directly going to equate to your bandwidth of what you can reasonably do for great content. With that being said, most of my clients will release once a week. When you're releasing once a week, it's a consistent strategy. It's keeping you top of mind. It's always going to put up those episodes in your listeners' apps because you have a new episode out. So growing is a little bit quicker when you're releasing every week, because what happens, like if somebody were to take a really long break, you get forgotten about. So if you're only launching one episode a month, which I don't recommend, that's a really long break, like an entire month in between episodes. Your listeners are going to forget about you is what's going to happen. And then you're going to have to start growing that again, and then you're going to take another month off. So it's really hard to kind of grow it a month. So I usually, when I'm asked this question, as long as you can handle it, is once a week. I don't ever recommend once a month. It's not great. I had a client come to me and they wanted to launch a podcast, and when we were talking about how often we were going to release the podcast, she asked me what my thoughts were on once a month, and I didn't recommend it. But once a week was just too much. That was too much for them to handle. So we went to twice a month. Not optimal. Optimal is going to be once a week, but at least every 2 weeks is better than once a month. And I'm not going to push for once a week because they don't have the bandwidth to handle that. So like we said, quality over quantity, and we kind of want to balance that. So preferably once a week. If you can't handle that, twice a month. Okay, next up is your episode structure. Several ways you can do this one also. So let's talk through the different ways you can do this. And my clients are like split with how they do it, because it really does come down to personal preference. So one client, when I'm editing her audio, I will hear like a 15-second clip that's like a great hook. So I'll copy that and I'll put it before her intro. So she'll have like this 15-second hook. She'll have her intro, and then it'll go into her episode, and then it goes into her outro. So that's the first way. Second way, your intro, no hook, into your main episode, into your outro. The third way, you can kind of like record like a 30-second summary of what the episode is going to be about, and then that can be that summary first, then it goes into your intro, then it goes into your main episode, and then it goes into your outro. So those are kind of the different ways, and one's not better than the other. It truly comes down to personal preference. I have clients that mostly do a hook into their episode or nothing into their intro into their episode. So one way to decide how you want to structure your episode is go listen to your favorite podcasters. What are they doing? And if you're consistently seeing that they have a hook in the beginning of their episode and you really like that because it's drawing you in, structure your podcast the same way. Or if you're listening to your favorite podcasters and they just have their intro starting into their episode and you really like that, then structure your podcast that way. And you're not stuck with anything you've chosen. If you decide you want to switch up your podcast format, you can switch up your podcast format. Like, none of this is set in stone. You can change your mind. It's not a big deal. So just pick something that you think you like and start there. Okay, that's it for today. That was talking through your podcast format and your structure. Don't forget to grab my free resource, Launch Your Podcast Roadmap. It's filled with tons of resources, recommendations for microphones, headphones, all of the things that you need to get started, and you can grab it at the link below. And then join me back next week when we're going to talk about naming your podcast. Naming your podcast really needs to have a strategy, because your podcast name is one of the very few things that are searchable in a podcast player. So you want to make sure you have keywords and it's SEO optimized and all of those things. So you want to make sure that you are really thinking through your podcast name. We're going to go over some things that you definitely do not want to do when it comes to your podcast name. So that's next week. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more videos just like this one, helping you get your podcast ready for launch day. See you next week.